This has been a really interesting year at our company, WP Valet. We started a little over 2.5 years ago, and over the past year have really seen an uptick in our customers asking for results. Not just asking for a website, not just asking for a landing page, not asking for a blog, but wanting to talk about their actual business and achieving some results there, getting a return on their investment, not just, you know, in like paid advertising, but in the actual development. How can we track that? And that was really interesting. And part of our DNA at WP Valet is that we really love difficult problems. We really like things that we totally don't understand and that seem really tricky to solve. And we just love to sink our teeth into those and figure those out. And so when we started to have customers that had that question, that was a little different for us, and we've spent quite a bit of time this year in meetings and talks, in researching and trying to understand what is data-driven development, what are the metrics that we should be using, and how do we even know which of all of these metrics, because once you start looking into it, there's tons of them, how do we know which ones are really effective? And so we really started to rethink our whole approach to development. But you're not here just to talk about WP Valet, you're not here to hear about me, so let me tell you about me. I am the CEO of WP Valet, started it 3 years ago. You can check us out at wpvalet.com. You can find me on Twitter at Mason James. And I have a few goals for this talk. We're going to talk about data-driven, metric-focused approach to development. We're going to talk about why that's even valuable for you as a developer. We're going to talk a little bit about how we determine which metrics are actually important for a business. And I also want to apply that to the WordPress community. Because actually, if you're here at a WordCamp, you are in some way contributing to WordPress. Even if you're not a core contributor to the software, you do contribute to WordPress because you're talking to your customers, or you're talking to friends, or you're even just using WordPress as a software. You are contributing to WordPress. And I haven't seen a lot of data around how we measure the success of WordPress as a community and how we're engaging people in that regard. So we're gonna hit on that a little bit too. I think that metric-focused, data-driven approach is really, it makes sense for businesses. They're looking for an ROI, they're looking for a return on their investment, but we can apply that same thing to the engagement of us as a community around WordPress and how successful are we with what we do there. So we're gonna hit on both. And one of the ways I think that we've recently seen that specifically for the WordPress community, we want to start measuring it, is something Matt Mullenweg said earlier this year. In a blog post, he had one called 5 for the Future. And in this blog post, and I got the link up there as well, you can check it out, he talks about wanting to see agencies give 5% of their people back to core contribution to WordPress. And that, you know, so for a development agency of 20 people, that's going to be challenging. You have then one person that could be totally committed to WordPress, the software. And that raised a lot of discussion. I just found that interesting because it was the first time I'd heard somebody give any sort of metric to that. Give any sort of, hey, this is what I think would be cool. And it's a lot more about the philosophy behind giving back than a real number. But there is a number to it. It's a metric that we can actually use then to see how successful we are in our contributions. And his point behind it was that it's really the only way that the WordPress community could scale. And that's the same thing that businesses are looking at. How can we increase? How can we scale? And how can we measure our success with that? So this conversation applies to both, you know, if you're a developer for businesses, or if you are just, you know, a WordPress enthusiast and want to give back to the community, what data can we use to see if we're successful, and how do we measure that? And even how do we know which metrics are appropriate? Because there's tons of data out there. This is just a sample of probably something very familiar to you guys, a Google Analytics screenshot. And there are hundreds, if not thousands, of tools available to us today to measure everything, right? We can measure pretty much anything, any action that's taking place online, we can measure that in some way and store that. So as soon as you start to talk about a data-driven approach, the first question is, how do we know which ones are even valuable to what we're trying to do? And that's really what we're going to focus on today. There's really no business that's out there that doesn't at least have Google Analytics installed on their website. And that's kind of a really base level for being able to look at your data and measure it. But not just businesses use that, even WordPress uses it. So across social media, I just grabbed a couple quick screenshots here. And some of these come from a site called wpcentral.io. So if you're interested in some WordPress stats, they have some really cool graphs that I found. But, you know, like, oh, look, WordPress has 902,000 likes. Like, we're almost at 1 million likes on Facebook. The stats just for WordPress 4.0 right now is at 27, almost 28 million downloads. We can look at the amount of followers, 413,000 followers on Twitter. You can see how many different people are using different versions of WordPress and PHP and MySQL. So we have all this data that we're looking at. That's all fantastic. Does any of that actually help us understand if WordPress is successful as a community? That's what we're going to try to figure out today. So there's lots of tools for tracking this kind of data, but they still actually require a bit of customization, because 413,000 followers may sound like a lot. It may sound like not a lot if you have, you know, if you're Charlie Sheen or somebody else, right? Like, we need to have some context for the data. We need to understand how that data exists as part of the whole picture to actually come up with an approach, to actually understand how it's and why it's valuable. So, because if you're not, it could actually be harmful. You could actually think like, wow, look at, we've got so many visits this month. We've got, you know, 200,000 visits. We must be doing awesome. And discover a few months down the road, wait a minute, our revenue's down. So was that measurement, like that was cool, but was it helpful? Maybe not. And a couple years ago, there's several software solutions for measuring data. There's Leftronics, Mixpanel, HubSpot, Chartbeat, Google Analytics, like we saw. Kenshu is another one. So there's so many different solutions out there. And an article that I found by Mixpanel calls for an end of what they call bullshit metrics. So these are like metrics that people are using, and a lot of times it's your C-level execs. It's like, you know, the head of the company that's just like, wow, check this out. Yeah, we had, you know, 50 million downloads. That's awesome. But they may not actually reflect the health and status of the organization. So that's what we're trying to figure out. Do these metrics actually work? And Mixpanel, which is one of those software solutions that looks at data, has a real interest in saying, hey, as an internet community, we need to be more transparent about which stats actually lead to the success of what we're doing versus the stats that just make us feel good about ourselves. And there's a quote from it that I really liked. And it says, companies need to start using a new set of metrics that don't simply make them feel good. They should use actionable metrics that provide insight, provide guidance, and help businesses make better decisions. In other words, not all metrics are created equal, and they're not all valuable to what you're doing. So for today, we're just going to put them into two different categories. This is like an intro-level talk to what is a massive conversation. So we're really simplifying it here and breaking the metrics that are available down into two types. And the first is called vanity metrics. And I think this guy just totally typifies that. Vanity metrics. So these are what make you feel really good, right? Like, man, that visit count looks awesome. Did you check out, you know, how many readers we had on this blog post? Check out how many times we got this retweet. Like, it makes you feel good, right? Because you have that. But they lack context. They lack the insight to see, as part of our company strategy or the goals that we have, is that helpful? Is it relevant? Does it get us to where we want to go? Vanity metrics don't do that. They don't give you the ability to do that. It's just a cool number that makes you feel good, but it doesn't help you. So the other type of metric, and the one we're going to spend some time focusing on today, is called an action metric. This is the real deal. These give us the context. They give us a concrete metric that provides a clear understanding of a specific aspect of the health of the organization. And they give us something actionable. It's something we can actually do. So if you know your visit count or your download count or your sale count is a certain number, that doesn't give you any indication of what you should do next, right? We need something actionable, something more specific to help us decide, okay, we see a pattern, we see a trend, and we already know what our goal is. So when we're making a decision about a landing page, or we're making a decision about how we're going to restructure our homepage to present our offering, like, we can make an intelligent decision based on data. That's the goal. So as we do this, we really need to ask ourselves, as you're looking at data, the first question. So you've run Google Analytics, you're starting to get into this, you want to have this conversation with your client, or even as an organization, you want to have this conversation. We want to look at WordPress and say, okay, we're going to take this data, how do we decide what's appropriate? The first question we should ask ourselves is, do the metrics we're tracking help us make a decision? Does it help you make a decision? If you look at a piece of data and you go, now I know what I should do next, cool, that's actionable, that's an action metric. If you look at a piece of data and you go, it makes me feel good, or it makes me feel sad even, but I don't have any idea of what to do next, that's a vanity metric. That's sort of the first level metric that's very basic, and it isn't going to be helpful as you try to make a decision about how to move forward. So today, we're going to look at 3 steps for finding the actionable metrics, and I'm going to give a small example of how to do that I think can apply to both when you're talking to a client or to a business about them helping achieve their goals, and also for the WordPress community, how we could be looking for actionable metrics to improve our success as a community. And the first one is to search your feelings, right? When you start this process, you're not going to know the data that you need to know, right? You're not going to know. You have to really take a look at your business or at your organization or your community and define who you are and define what success means for you. It doesn't have to be a long list of a lot of things. It can be really short. It can be 2 to 3 items. But these should be the things that are they are core to your DNA. They define the success of what you're doing. And this is part of what we ask all of our clients during what we call the discovery phase. So we ask our clients, what are your goals for this project? And one of the things I'll say is it takes more time to do this, right? And not every business is planning for that. They're like, no, I want a website. We've got a new product. We just want a site. Can you just do that, right? And when a client wants that, they're really just asking you for your hands. They just want you to do the thing, right? If a client comes to you and they're like, well, we'd really like you to help us, make sure that we're hitting our goals and map out a roadmap for success, they're not just asking for your hands, they're asking for your mind. And one of the great things is you get to charge more for that, and it's a lot more fun problem solving. But it isn't every customer that wants this, right? Some people do. They just need a site, they need it up, and they really aren't maybe having this thought process yet. So I do think there's a flow to getting there. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to come up with a short list of goals or places you want to be as an organization, as a company. And that's part of what we do. And then you take those and you're going to identify the goals for the actual metrics. So again, we have all this data. Now we need to figure out, okay, we have defined our goals. What data are we going to use to make sure that we actually hit those goals? That's a little abstract, so I'm going to give an example. So one of the goals might be to increase the value of participation. This is all about engagement. Now this could be for a business, this is really high level, but for a business or an organization, this is just talking about how do we increase the value of what the people feel when they come to us. So what does a visitor to your website experience? How do they feel valued? What are your users or your contributors, what do they feel? Do they feel like they're getting rewarded for the actions that they take? If they do, they're more likely to come back, right? So the first thing that you have to ask yourself, if this is your goal, we want to increase the value of participation, you need to really think about what motivates the people who come to your site. What motivates the people who come to your organization? When we measure how successful this WordCamp is, we want to see what motivated people to come here in the first place. Why are they here? And did we make them feel valued? And did we increase that? There's a fantastic talk on this. A guy named Dan Pink gave a TED talk that this YouTube link will take you to. They do like this great animation thing that really talks about what motivates people. So whether it's a person coming to your site and your goal for them is to be engaged by clicking a button or submitting their email address or actually making a purchase or starting a trial, you need to understand what motivated them to get there in the first place, and then make sure you're validating that. This talk is really fascinating because it talks about a research that was done by MIT in which they were looking at the rewards and how that compares to the type of task and the actual performance that a person did on that task based on the reward. So they had 3 different levels: a small reward, a medium reward, and a large reward, and they signed people up and said, do this task, and then they tracked how well they did based on what the reward was. And what they found was that if the task was very mechanical, it was just if this, then that, I do this, I do this, I do this, I do this, it went pretty well, like you would kind of expect, right? So the higher the reward got, the better people did, right? The more motivated they were to do really good work. What they didn't expect, and what they actually found, and these guys were economists, like they weren't out for any other agenda than to really understand this, was that if the task was actually cognitive, so if it required like brain function, you had to think about something and create a solution, they found that the higher the monetary reward was, actually the worse the performance became. And what they found, and this really is a great talk, it's about 10 minutes long, it's not that long, was that the monetary reward, that carrot, wasn't actually what motivated the people who were trying to solve a problem or trying to be creative. That wasn't the most rewarding thing for them. And that's really interesting to think about, especially as WordPress as an organization, and we're looking for people to contribute. We need to really understand what motivates these people to get involved in the first place. And there's several ways to do that. For businesses or for the community, there's so many things you can do, right? So you can take a survey. So you can have a pop-up on the website that says, hey, take a quick survey, you'll get this free ebook. That's just a made-up example, but that's one way you can do it. There's several solutions that will provide user feedback. User testing is one, but you want to get people's feedback. How was your experience when you came to our site? What were you thinking? What did you like? What really turned you off? Another way you can do it is with live chat. So they have those little corner pop-up chats. Just get a technician on there, and ask them, hey, how's it going? Do you have any questions that I can answer? And just by recording that data and just having one person on your landing page that's there live, probably one will increase your conversions, because you're doing what? You're increasing the value of their participation. So those are some great places. And then just having specific landing pages that speak to what you know are the motivations and goals of your customers. All of those are really great ways that we can start to get a picture of what motivates the people who come to this site. And then specifically with WordPress, every year WordPress does a survey of anybody who wants to fill it out, basically. And what they're tracking is how many people make their living straight up off of WordPress, how many sites are they building a year, about how much do you charge per site. And Matt Mullenweg does a State of the Word address every year in which he presents the results of the survey. And it's super awesome, right? And it's a really fantastic time. You can look it up on WordPress.tv to see the one from this last year, and it's super awesome. What I would like to see, and this may happen internally, but I've never seen it happen publicly, is an actual survey that talks about WordPress contributors. It says, hey, you give back to WordPress. Why do you do that? What motivates you? Because that helps us see, why are people engaging this? Why are they participating? How can we make that easier? How can we make that better? My hunch is it's probably not for monetary gain. It's probably things like, oh, I really want to share my knowledge and skills with other people. I really wanted to give something back because I've received from the WordPress community. I really wanted to learn something new is probably top of the list. I know that's why I dive into something, is because I actually want to learn it. And so I'll contribute back to it. Or I just wanted to help improve WordPress for other developers. I had a problem. I needed to solve it for me, and it would be helpful to solve it for other people. More than likely, that's what we'll see is what is behind people's contributing to WordPress. And then, so that's all about goal number 1. And then goal number 2, as this, would be to measure the effects of business decisions. So you know your goals, and then you're going to make a business decision. How in the world do we actually measure the impact of that business decision? So I have a great example of this that we did at WP Valet. Beginning of this year, 2014, we had, up until that point, a very complicated, like 3 or 4 page long submission form if you wanted a migration. So if you wanted a migration, you needed to know what type of WordPress site you had, what its version was, where it was currently hosted, your cPanel logins, your DNS settings, where you were migrating to, those account logins, what the name of the install was, if you'd modified WordPress core, anything outside of WordPress that also needed to be included, how many gigs of data that was. It was massive. And we thought, you know what, we knew it was massive. We knew it sucked, right? Like, nobody wants to fill all of that out. And so we thought, you know what, let's change it. Like, let's just make it way easier. Like, let's be conversational, and let's just make it, let's go completely the opposite direction. Let's say, hey, give us your name, give us your email address, just so we know who you are, and then tell us what you want. Just talk to us, tell us what you want. So we made that. That's a business decision. We've got this long form. We get a certain amount of conversions on it. We know we get a lot of people that abandon midstream because they don't even know what cPanel is. They don't know what DNS is, right? So we're going to go the opposite direction. We'll go the other. We immediately saw a 300% increase in the amount of leads coming in. Wow, right? Like, that is awesome. Except it was awful. Because we had 300% leads coming in and fewer conversions. So suddenly I'm hiring more people to answer these, potential customers' questions, and I'm getting less revenue. So by switching from that complicated form, we made a business decision, and it took us, just because I'm a little slow, it took us 4 months to realize this sucks, and we don't want to do it that way anymore. And you can go look at our site now and see what it is now. It's more of a blend of those two. We ask for some data up front, but we can save the complicated stuff till after you're ready. But you need to be able to measure that. Because if you're not measuring it, you might just go, wow, 300% more people coming in, that's got to be awesome. And you'll spend 4 months losing money until you realize that you've done it. So being able to measure the effects of your business decisions is really important. And the final goal is to understand the relationship between metrics and business performance. Again, this applies for business and for WordPress as a community. If you don't understand how the metrics are lining up and how that has an impact then on your business performance, you're bound to make some wrong decisions. This is my favorite. So the y-axis here is the total US highway fatality rate. The x-axis is the number of lemons imported from Mexico. And there's clearly, you can see as you look at the years, as we go along and we import more lemons from Mexico, the number of fatalities goes down. Yes, like, that's great, but so what's the solution? We need more lemons, right? Like, that's how we solve this problem, is we get more lemons. But no, obviously that's not correct. And that's why when we go to this, we need to be able to look at the metrics and actually understand how it affects our business. And so if you don't get that, if you're not quite clear on that, then you're bound to make some mistakes, which we'll get to, and it's totally cool. The final step, then, is to decide what to measure and what actions to take based on that. In the, I think it was the 17th century, maybe 18th, in Hanoi, Vietnam, the French government had decided, you know what, we are going to go to Hanoi and we are going to set up like the Vietnamese version of Paris. And this is going to be great. We're going to bring in our best engineers, our best architects. They're going to come in here. We're going to totally redo the infrastructure. We're going to make this just a glorious place. So they came in there and they started doing that, and they quickly realized as they were building things up that they had a really big problem. And that problem was rats. Lots and lots and lots of rats just running rampant in the city. And so they had their engineers over there and they said, well, figure out a way to solve this. Like, how do we fix this problem of the rats? And so they thought about it, and they eventually came up with a way, like, we'll get the actual people here to help us with that. We don't have the manpower to really take care of this rat problem, so we're going to get the local people involved and we're going to get them to help. And the way we're going to do it is we're going to create an incentive for them. So if they bring us the rat tails, we'll know, hey, they killed the rat, and we'll actually pay them for those rat tails. Well, what do you think happened? Now there's an entire group of rats all running around without tails on. Because guess what? If you cut the tail off and let the rat free, he's going to keep having babies, and you're going to have more tails to cut off. They even found places where there were farms of people just farming rats so that they could collect these tails. What did they end up with? They ended up with a whole bunch of rat tails and didn't solve their problem. So that's an example of an unintended consequence, right? And it's really important that when we're looking at this, we know what we want to measure and what action we should take, right? Because lemons doesn't actually have a correlation to the fatalities in the US, and rat tails may not actually have a significant impact on the number of live rats running around your city. The other thing to consider is that the things that you value, the way you value them depends on what you compare them to. So it doesn't exist in a vacuum, it exists in context. When we decide to buy something, we're looking at the price and in our heads we're comparing it to the things that are important to us to decide whether that price is worthwhile or not. And what you find when you start measuring things is you tend to become what you measure. So if you've decided that your goal is downloads and that's what you're focused on, you're going to find that that's what you increase in, is the number of downloads. So it's really important that we know what we actually value, that when we defined our goals, that goal wasn't number of downloads. And when we look at even WordPress, and we think about this, we look at the vanity metrics and the action metrics. The one I hear over and over is WordPress powers 23% of the internet, which is a pretty awesome vanity metric. But does it actually give us a measurement for the success of our WordPress community? I would call it a level 1, a basic metric, not one that provides us with an action. So I've got a few just examples here to show you, and we'll be done. So for a website, here's just some examples of what I would say are first order or the vanity metrics. Number of visits, download sales, bounce rate, number of users, percent mobile, maybe, the most popular poster page. Those are all things that you get to brag about. But none of those give you like real insight into an action. Maybe the last two you could argue might give you some direction, but even still, I think you could dig deeper into that. And I think you see the same thing in the WordPress community. Right? We talked about we power 23% of the internet. But number of pull requests, number of commits, number of authors, number of bug reports, number of forum posts and answers, number of downloads, number of open tickets or code reviews, those are all really cool stats, but they're not actionable. We don't have an idea of what we should do as a community based on those stats. And really the key is just about filtering it down. It's about segmenting the data. I've heard that all aggregated data is crap. So if you had to aggregate it and come up with this cool number, it's not actually helpful. We need to take the data and we actually need to segment it down to something that gives us a specific actionable step. So some of these would be like the acquisitions, but in context of where they came from, in context of, if you're looking at selling a product, did they come there from a price comparison or did they come there via site search? Was it an organic search? Was it a landing page? All of those make a difference. And wherever you're spending your most time and your most money on customer acquisitions, that's where you should start. That's where you should focus. The location demographics of your customers can make a huge difference, and understanding them gets you back to what we talked about before, the motivation. Behaviors of visitors with 3+ page views, like if they've been to 3 different pages on your site, wait, that's cool. You should segment that data out. What are those users doing? What do they want? Because that's somebody you want to talk about. One of the other ones, I won't read all of these here, but customers with a days to transaction is 5 versus 1. So you can actually track that in Google, like when was the cookie set, when did they add something to their cart, and when did they actually purchase? What did those guys that did it in one day, like what was motivating them? What was different about them? Because we want those guys. It's all about acquisition behavior and outcomes. So even like if you have a shopping cart and you see that certain users have 50% higher value in their shopping cart and they're checking out than an average one, what's different about those users? What did that guy come to the site looking for? Because that's awesome. Same thing with the community. Second order metrics might be people who are just contributing to WordPress versus people who contribute to other open source platforms. The time between their first contribution and when it actually gets into the code base. What is that like for a new person? The evolution of contributor age over time. So somebody who, not like their chronological age, but like how long have they been contributing to WordPress? Because it's very valuable to our community that we have new people coming in all the time, but it's also valuable to see how many of these contributors have been since the beginning. They've been here for 10 years, and they're still coding with WordPress. How many people did we lose? Number of ignored messages or ignored contributions, and then the distribution and evolution of commits across functional areas. So where are we seeing the most interest in the community around specific core aspects to WordPress, and what are we doing to encourage the value of their participation? The last talk Zach gave was awesome and it was very code heavy, so this has not been that. I will give you one slide with fake code. And here's my function for coming up with the metric and making sure that we can measure it and that it's any good. So how accurate is it? That is a loaded question because sometimes you think a number is really accurate and you come to find out, wait a minute, there's all these other things that have an impact. How can it help achieve your goals? What to do when it turns good or bad? So if you get to this metric, whether it's good or bad, you need to have an action plan for that. Wow, we hit this particular thing, what's the action that we take? And then what is its relationship to the other metrics that you have? And you need to do this continually. User testing should not happen once, it should happen over and over and over again. When you have a very specific action of a segmented user, you want to iterate on that and see what else happens. So in summary, I would say when you're looking at the data-driven approach, you want to identify the values and goals of your user, of your organization, of the community. Avoid focusing on the vanity metrics. It's not even necessary to report them. Who cares? Like, ultimately, you want the metrics that actually get you actionable insights to your goals. Decide on the actions ahead of time, so know what you're going to do when you hit those goals. And then just assume that you're going to be wrong a lot of times, like that you're going to have something that comes in that you didn't expect. So assume inaccuracies, and the way you deal with that is you experiment. So whether it's A/B testing with Optimizely, make a small change, run a test, see how it goes, and then make another change. Iterate on what you're doing. That's it. Thank you very much for your time. I'm Mason James. Find me here. I think we have like 10 minutes for questions, if anybody has them. Yeah?
What are some of the best tools for A/B testing, and are there any that are free?
Best tools for A/B testing. Oh, say it again, I guess.
Yes, what are some of the best tools for A/B testing, and are there any that are free?
A/B testing, and are there any that are free? There's actually a couple plugins. If you're specific in WordPress, there are a couple plugins that will let you do some A/B testing. I haven't used them in a while. One's like Theme A/B Review or something like that. We use Optimizely. They have a free trial for like 30 days where you can, at least try it out and see it. And then I think it goes to like $19 a month if you want to continue that experiment. And if you've never done A/B testing, really, I would get the free trial and try out Optimizely. I was floored at how easy it was for me, as somebody who doesn't get to dig into code very much anymore, to just go, oh, I want to change this, this, and this. Oh, I've got them changed. Oh, okay, now the experiment's live. And immediately start getting feedback. It was fantastically easy. So I'm a big fan of them. Anybody else? Way over there.
When you talk about people contributing to WordPress, you just mean contributing to core, or is there more to it?
I would include more than just the core software, because in Matt's address this year, that one of the top 3 things that people always say, this is why I use WordPress, the software, is because of the community. So any way of giving back to the community, whether it's answering questions on WordPress.org in the forums, just going and going, hey, I know that answer, and providing an answer, engaging in an event like this. There's a local WordPress meetup here in Orlando that meets once or twice a month. So I think there's a lot of different ways that we can contribute. Sharing code snippets, when you find a solution like this totally worked for me, sharing that is going to help someone else who's coming along that has that same issue. So contributing to core is fantastic. And I think when Matt was talking about that, he really, like, agencies that have the manpower and really have a vested interest in the direction of WordPress. The core is a fantastic place, but there's so much more that you can give back. Even, you find a plugin that has a bug and just reporting that back to the developer, to me, that you didn't have to do that. You're taking an extra time to give back. I would include all of that.